Video games are cool. So cool, in fact, that sometimes I just like to take a step back and appreciate a video game console and its library of games as if it were a museum of low-poly art. Because to me, a game console doesn't just define an era of the gaming industry. These pieces of hardware can also represent a time in a person's life due to the fond memories that are often attached to them. Whether it's discovering some of your favorite games for the first time, playing multiplayer games with your friends, or ditching those very same friends to play Wii Sports alone in your room. 2007 was a weird year for me. Video game consoles often provide a unique experience for each person. Some people have consoles that maybe they don't really like, and some people might be indifferent to ones that they didn't grow up with. But today, I want to talk about one of those consoles that I did grow up with. While I did somewhat briefly share the story of how I got my GameCube in a previous video, today I want to talk about the Nintendo 64, why it means so much to me, and maybe even why I spent a concerning amount of money on a device that will allow me to capture the best possible footage from an unmodded Nintendo 64. Well, there's no going back now. I first played the N64 when I was in 2nd grade. A friend who owned one had invited me over to spend the night, and at the time I actually didn't even know what a Nintendo 64 was. I only had the GameCube for around a year at that point, and I had a Game Boy Advance as well. But as a 7-year-old kid, the idea of a video game company having this entire back catalog of games was just something that had never even occurred to me. But I guess you could say younger kids of that age generally are just living in the present, and stuff that happened before their time just isn't really a concept to them yet. I don't know, there's probably some kind of psychological study for that though. Anyway, the games that I vividly remember playing at that sleepover were Smash and Mario Kart 64. And once I saw that this console had Mario games on it, that was when everything clicked, and I was just like, oh, this thing must have come out sometime before the GameCube. I think this was also the moment that piqued my interest in retro games and video game history in general. Just realizing that there were a couple decades worth of games that released before I was even born was mind-blowing to me at the time. So that night, we stayed up until sunrise, mostly playing Mario Kart 64 from what I remember, and obviously since we were just kids, we had a really hard time containing our excitement, and we kept waking up my friend's mom by accident. So when we would hear her coming down the hallway, we would quickly turn off the TV, leave the console on, and jump into bed and pretend to be asleep. It was pretty much the real-life version of Gamer from Game & Wario, just not as terrifying. So eventually it was getting close to be my birthday. I think I was turning 8, I'm not exactly sure though, I've honestly lost track of what age roughly corresponds to what year in school at this point, but anyway, it was almost my birthday, and my mom asked me what I wanted, and of course I said a Nintendo 64. I don't even remember specifically asking for any games with it, but knowing me, at the time I probably just said Mario games, and left her to decode that on her own. Sorry, Mom. As a side note, I remember this one time when a kid at school told me that there was a Mario game on the PS1, and oh man, what a wild goose chase that was, because for the ill-informed, that doesn't exist, because Mario is owned by Nintendo. But to my malnourished baby boy shriveling brain, video games were just video games, and I didn't really get the whole company owning characters thing yet. So I was completely fooled, and what an awkward call to EB Games that was for Mario on the PlayStation 1. Again, sorry, Mom.
Which one of you jokers goes by the name Mario?
It's me! Could you step outside, please? Welcome to Mario Party.
So my birthday finally came, and I did get a Nintendo 64. It was pre-owned, of course, because the year was somewhere around 2004. I'm pretty sure it was 2004. And it came with a standard gray controller that unfortunately felt like someone had spilled Pepsi on it and just wiped down the outside because some of the buttons would stick and others just didn't work. So we had to go to EB Games, and luckily they had a brand new third-party controller, which isn't as great as a first-party controller, but for a kid who just really wanted to play Mario 64, it got the job done until I eventually got this official green controller that still works great to this day. As for the games that I got on my birthday, well, there were two. One of them was, of course, the legendary Super Mario 64, and the other was the very first Mario Party, which I loved so much, even though I mostly only ever played the game alone because, well, the whole one working controller thing from earlier. But I honestly didn't mind at all as a kid because I was just happy to finally own this console myself. One thing that makes the N64 a really special and memorable console is its small but extremely solid lineup of games. Sure, a lot of them run at some shockingly low frame rates at times, and many titles struggle to hold up visually because of some bizarre filtering choices that are apparently there to make the graphics look smoother on old CRTs, but in turn make the visuals a fuzzy mess on modern displays, even with premium upscalers and other devices. However, in my opinion, this flaw is part of the charm and can be worked around with options like emulation on a PC or even a custom firmware Wii U loaded with dozens of virtual console injects with dark filters disabled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The N64's small library of games made the prominent characters on the system feel like a sort of tightly knit family, especially with games like Diddy Kong Racing and Smash taking a handful of IPs and putting them all together in one game. Also, just look at this. The N64 had just under 300 games in the US. Its rival, the PS1, had somewhere around 1,300. The sheer difference in the amount of titles on each console still amazes me to this day. But it also makes sense. The N64 was a lot more difficult and expensive to develop games for compared to the PS1 with its CD technology. I still think about how different gaming in the late 90s could have been if Nintendo opted for a CD-based console a generation earlier instead of waiting for the GameCube. And I think that Nintendo kind of realized their misstep with the whole cartridge to CD push back then and tried to address it with the release of the Nintendo 64 disk drive. But sadly, that add-on really crashed upon takeoff in Japan. Nearly every game that was in development for the disk drive was either cancelled or reworked to fit on a cartridge. Even though the fate of the disk drive is tragic, I still wouldn't have the N64 of our timeline any other way, and I'm truly happy with the legacy that this console has left behind. Well, it would have been really cool to see what Earthbound 64 could have been, but with the cancellation of that game came Mother 3, and even though we still don't have an official release of that game outside of Japan, I know that a lengthy, ambitious JRPG that ran on a disc-based add-on for the N64 would be an absolute nightmare to emulate, because we know how modern companies struggle to make their retro libraries accessible. As I said earlier, my journey through the N64's library of games started out pretty humble with Mario 64 and Mario Party, and for the first several months of owning this console, these were my only two games for it. However, my collection slowly grew. Every once in a while, I would go to garage sales and flea markets with my parents, and back in the early 2000s, it wasn't uncommon to find people selling N64 games for very low prices. Back then, I of course gravitated to anything with Mario on it, so it wasn't long before I was playing Mario Party 2 and 3 alone, Mario Kart alone, and finally even my own copy of Super Smash Bros., which I also mostly played by myself. I've always kind of laughed at myself because of how most people remember the N64 to be a multiplayer machine with its 4 controller ports and solid lineup of multiplayer games. But I grew up playing a majority of the console's most renowned multiplayer games by myself, and I still had a great time. Did anyone else have this experience with the 64? I'm genuinely curious. Well, loneliness aside, let me get into some of the games I spent most of my childhood playing on this console. I still love going back to Mario Party 1, 2, and 3. There's just something about the style of these games that didn't really make the jump over to the GameCube Mario Parties, and don't even get me started on the more recent entries. Super Mario Party was okay, but the boards were too small and there were only 4, so it sucked. The boards in these games were all super detailed pre-rendered backgrounds that give off a lot of PS1 vibes. The first Mario Party did this thing with its minigames where characters would just become objects, or even Bowser in some cases, which was fun, and then Mario Party 2 had the the characters dress up in different costumes depending on what board you were playing on, and it's so sad that they didn't do this again. And then Mario Party 3 had this cool pop-up book style to it, and it was just an even more refined version of the first two entries. I also remember way back when Mario Party was one of my only games on the system, I spent a ton of time playing this single-player mode where you had to win every minigame. They even made a unique overworld map for this mode, which looks really cool. I do remember it being really difficult though, and taking a look at my original save file here, it looks like I was never able to beat it. Mario Party 2 had a similar mode to this as well that I actually didn't know about until recently. I tried giving it a shot and it made me realize that I definitely won't get very far without some practice. The original Paper Mario is one of those games that I give a lot of credit to for refining my taste in games in general. It was one of the first turn-based RPGs I had ever played and helped further solidify my love for this genre even at such a young age. I actually played this game after playing Thousand Year Door on the GameCube back when I was a kid, and to this day I still couldn't tell you which one I like more. But if I had to make a list of my favorite N64 games, Paper Mario would definitely be in the top 3. Maybe even number 1 honestly, but I don't know, I'm really terrible at picking favorites. One really fun memory that I have with this game is that my sister used to love watching me play it back when we were kids. So much so that I eventually ended up creating a save file with her name on it that I would only play when she wanted to watch me so that she could experience the full game. And then years later, it ended up being one of the first games that she ever beat by herself when we downloaded it on the Wii Virtual Console. Watching her beat Bowser in that final chapter of the game and actually timing out the action commands surprisingly well made me a very proud older brother. Paper Mario is full of memorable characters, unique enemies, colorful and varied environments, and incredibly solid turn-based combat, so basically everything that the new games don't have. But seriously, this game is great, and it is one of my favorite games of all time. Recently, the trendy thing is to beg Nintendo for a remaster of Thousand Year Door, and that would be awesome, but I strongly believe that the original Paper Mario should not be overlooked. It's definitely worth tracking down a copy of if you've never played it. I also have some really fond memories with games that people tend to not like so much these days. Yoshi's Story is one of those, and while I haven't really played it all the way through since I was a kid, I remember loving it back then. Sure, it's no Yoshi's Island, and I even remember preferring Yoshi's Island back when I first got Yoshi's Story, but that didn't stop me from having a good time with this game anyway. It's one of the only 2D platformers on the N64, and I personally think that its visuals and cute art style hold up really well. It makes me wish that we saw at least a few more 2D platformers on the N64. Imagine what Donkey Kong Country 4 could have been with the extra power that the N64 provides over the Super Nintendo. And those were like really ambitious games on the Super Nintendo too. Or even a Metroid game on the 64 with 2D visuals. It could have been really cool, and I feel like they could have really utilized the N64's extra power that it provides to create a even more visually impressive Super Metroid style game. Donkey Kong 64 is another game that kind of has a bad reputation these days, and while I can't comment much on the single player because I never really took the time to get very far in the game myself, I did have a friend back in grade school who was obsessed with the DK64 multiplayer mode, so I do have some fond memories of, Monkey Smash, I guess. Other than that, this is definitely a game that I want to play through and give my full thoughts on at some point because it is chock full of that chunky N64 aesthetic. Both of the Pokemon Stadium games were where a decent amount of my time on the console was spent. Sadly, I never even had a transfer pack growing up, so I couldn't connect my Game Boy games to the 64, which was like the main reason to own these games. But I do remember having a great time using the rental Pokemon to recreate teams from the anime, even though the rentals are so bad that completing the game without the help of a transfer pack is nearly impossible. But for me, this was one of the rare cases in which a lot of the fun actually did come from multiplayer. As a fan of Pokemon in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was nothing cooler than being able to build a team out of all of your favorite creatures and battle your friends. Also, the minigames are still a ton of fun to play with friends to this day. Some are better than others, and the selection isn't huge, but they are without a doubt a fun side mode to check out when you've had enough battling. And if I had to choose a favorite, I'd definitely go with Clear Cut Challenge from Stadium 2. When I was in middle school, I discovered my love for the Legend of Zelda series after getting into Wind Waker on the GameCube. After finishing that game, I wasted no time tracking down copies of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. These two games are the definition of chill, lo-fi hip-hop beats to study to at 3 a.m. depression N64 aesthetic radio. And by that I mean they're super atmospheric and memorable experiences, especially for super early 3D games. But like, that's what makes them so cool. Just look at some of these environments, these unique and quirky locations combined with bizarre characters and extremely catchy melody-focused music that creates an unforgettable experience. And then you have the dungeons, which go for a more creepy and foreboding approach with both music and visuals. People often credit Majora's Mask for being the scarier game, but Ocarina of Time has its decent handful of very unsettling moments as well. Majora's Mask had the whole living, breathing world thing going on. Residents of Clock Town will be going about their daily routines, and it's up to the player to help them out with stuff, often requiring you to be in the right place at the right time. Some aspects of it kind of remind me of Animal Crossing, except you have a sword and can spit on people. I'm a big fan of the whole time management aspect of this game. Some people say it stresses them out, but I have always found games that reward the player for managing their time efficiently are extremely satisfying. The Pikmin series, Persona, and even Chibi Robo are really fun examples of gameplay like this. And one more thing before I move on, the art direction in this game is stunning. The overall mood in Majora's Mask is much darker than Ocarina of Time, but visually this game is much more bright and colorful in many areas, which serves as a really nice contrast to the more somber story and suits the game's extravagant cast of characters really well.
Hey, pal, where you going?
Alright, take my advice and get out of here. It's still really bad in there. You just don't want to go in there.
Calm down. Now, just calm down and tell me what's the matter.
Right. Okay. It all started about 2 days ago. It was me and the lads. We were having a cup of tea. The next thing we know, Tez is gone. We couldn't find him.
When I started high school, I suddenly went on a huge Rare binge after watching someone do a Let's Play of Conker's Bad Fur Day. And after I saw, well, this part,
I am the great mighty Pooh.
I just remember being like, this is the best game ever made. So I did some research on Rare, realized that they made some games that I already loved, like the Donkey Kong Country series. I also discovered a little game called Banjo-Kazooie that somehow flew under my radar for years, and I still don't understand how. I mean, Banjo was literally in Diddy Kong Racing, and I loved that game. So eventually, I did a quick search on eBay and bought a copy of Conkers for $40 and a bundle of both Banjo games for only $20. Those prices are a steal for legit copies of those 3 games today, but as a 15-year-old, $60 was like half my life savings. However, it didn't matter because once those packages finally arrived, it was totally worth every penny. The N64 was also my go-to console when I was sick for some reason. I guess I just found some sort of comfort in those fuzzy early 3D graphics. I remember this one time during my freshman year of high school, I was playing outside with my friends at night and I tripped and cut my hand. Then when I got up the next morning, I felt really sick, so I stayed home from school and spent the whole day playing Banjo-Kazooie. My hand hurt really bad and was all bandaged up from the night before, making it really difficult to play. But despite how horrible I was feeling, the comfort of staying inside on a crisp fall day and playing one of my favorite games helped take my mind off of things. And in that moment, all I was worried about was finding that last music note in Clanker's Cavern. most of the games that I've talked about in this video have been titles that I kind of grew up with. But another thing that I love about this console is how many new games I keep discovering for it, despite its super small library. Games like Snowboard Kids, Rocket Robot on Wheels, and the Bomberman games are all really solid experiences that I completely missed out on as a kid. I still don't really understand exactly what Blues Brothers 2000 is or why it exists, and even though it actually looks kind of horrible, I really want to play it for some reason. I even region modded my childhood console recently so that I can play some Japan-only releases like Custom Robo and Shiren the Wanderer. Also, the N64 ROM hacking scene has been absolutely crazy lately, with some projects that are so ambitious it's hard to believe that they are even possible in these old game engines. Mario 64 hacks have been a thing for quite a while, since like 2005 I think, but some of the games that people like Kaze and Skelix are putting out are so well made that your childhood dream of Mario 64 2 has been already realized like 100 times over by now. And if you're interested in something a little weirder and also kind of bad, check out my ROM hack videos. Also, Banjo-Kazooie hacks are now a thing, which is super cool. I haven't tried any out yet, but who knows, maybe I'll make a video about some of them in the future. Also, a handful of more popular ROM hacks are being reworked so that they can be played on original hardware with a flash cart, and seeing some of these games run on an actual N64 is the coolest thing ever. It really makes these fan games feel even more like official, unofficial sequels, if that makes any sense. Fan projects like these really make the N64 feel like the gift that never stops giving, and today the community is more active and creative than ever. There's just something about N64 games in general that just give me really cozy and comforting vibes. Maybe it's just nostalgia, and it probably is, but something about these chunky and polygonal characters and their rudimentary 3D worlds that they live in just hits me the right way, and I honestly don't know how else to explain it. But it's these warm, fuzzy feelings and fond memories that still keep me coming back to this old console to this day. I could have spent hours going more in depth both about games that I briefly touched on and the dozens that I didn't even get to in this video, but I think I'll save some of that for another time because there are tons of games that I want to make videos focusing on. Let me know about your fond memories with the Nintendo 64 in the comments. I'm curious to hear if there's anyone out there who feels the same way or anyone who completely disagrees with me about the N64. Or if you grew up with the PS1 or any other gaming device for that matter, tell me about your memories with it. Follow me on Twitch if you want to see me mess around with some, I don't know, weird ROM hacks like I did in these stream highlight videos. I probably put too much effort into editing those videos, but honestly, I had a lot of fun with them, so definitely check them out if you're interested. Also, I'm on Twitter if you want to watch me tweet sometimes. Links are in the description for all of that stuff. I really want to get in the groove of making videos more consistently, so if you like what you've seen so far, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on my next video. Anyway, that's all I've got for now, so thanks for watching.